Today we're going to be replacing the sway bar bushings and end links on a Toyota Camry. Now we're going to be replacing these because when I go over bumps I hear a lot of clunking noises coming from the front end. The first thing we're going to do is remove the wheel. So this here is the sway bar end link on the vehicle. It attaches to the sway bar, which goes over to the other side, and then it goes up and attaches to the top of the strut here. Over here you have two 18mm bolts, depending on which sway bar link you have. Of course this one is not original, that we're going to remove in order to get this link off. Now it's important to make sure that both wheels are off of the ground, otherwise the sway bar will be in tension. Sometimes these end links are so loose you can actually feel some play when you rock them back and forth. Now I'm going to spray a little bit of PB Blaster on the stab link nut here, because these can get quite rusty. Now these stabilizer links have a wrench flat on the back of the ball pin here, so I'm just going to insert my 18mm wrench to hold it, and then I'm going to wind off the nut. Now I'm going to turn the steering wheel slightly, and then that should give us enough room to remove the sway bar link from that strut bracket. I'm going to slip my 18mm wrench on this rusty nut here, and I'm going to try to give it a tug to loosen it. I'm going to try to double wrench that now, because it's on there really tight. Alright, I'm just going to give it a couple of whacks with a hammer to see if I can break that loose. Alright, it's time to call in the big guns. I'm just going to have to cut off this end link. So to give me enough room back there, I'm going to disconnect the tie rod from the knuckle. There we go. Well, this is proving to be quite the project. I finally cut the ball pin off of the stab link that goes into the sway bar. I also nicked up my sway bar pretty good. So now I'm going to attempt to grind off the rest of what's left of the ball pin here so I can get the nut off of the back and install the new stab link. And now with the ball pin grinded off, I can remove the remnants of the threaded portion, and you can see just how rusty these Canadian cars can get. Alright, now I'm going to replace the tie rod that I took off to get more clearance and replace that 19mm casting nut. So in order to replace the sway bar bushings, we're on the passenger side tire here underneath the vehicle. If you follow it up under the subframe here, you can see that this is the sway bar that runs from side to side, and the bushing is located inside of here where it mounts to the frame. You've got two 12mm bolts, which you can see through here and here. They are accessed from the top of the subframe, so it's a bit difficult. One here, and one that we're going to access on the other side of the wheel well. You can see this here is also the left side bushing that we're going to also replace. So here's what it looks like from the wheel well. This here is the steering rack, and we've got the sway bar. You can see it running across to the other side there, and this here is the 12mm bolt that we need to remove from the front side of the sway bar bushing. So I've got my socket on there. I'm just going to put this extension pipe over it and then lift up the sway bar a little bit and give it a bit of a swing. I'm only going to get about one click at a time, and if you put the sway bar down like this, it actually gives you more swing, so you get two clicks, but it's still going to take a while to get this bolt out. Alright, I was finally able to get that bolt off like half an hour later. It's pretty rusty. I'm just going to use a little bit of PB Blaster here and spray these down. So I'm just going to be using a 12mm ratcheting wrench to get up inside of here on the top of that bolt. Put the wrench on there and then break that free. And then I'm just going to ratchet that loose. And my ratchet is probably stuck now, isn't it? Yeah, it's kind of stuck. Alright, so rookie mistake. This wrench is now stuck on here. No matter how much wiggling I do, I can't get it out. So I might actually have to drop the subframe bolt down here to get my wrench off. I should probably not have backed it off as much as I could, because if you see on this side here, it does not need to be backed off all that way. It's going to touch the frame anyways. So I got a jack supporting the subframe. So I'm going to loosen up this 19mm bolt. Looks like I'm also going to have to loosen off this nut and this bolt that holds this bracket to the subframe. Now with the subframe loose, I'm just going to pry it down. I should be able to wiggle my wrench out. There we go, finally I got that bolt out. Okay, so now with the sway bar loose from the subframe, I can actually push this thing right up and rotate that bushing. And you can see that this bracket here can peel off just like that. And now I'm just left with the bushing on the sway bar itself to replace. Okay, here we are inside of the wheel well. And this here is the bushing. I'm just going to slide that up the sway bar over here into a spot that's more accessible. And I can reach in, and this bushing has a split in it. So I can easily just peel it off of the sway bar just like that, and that's the old bushing. This here's the old bushing with the bracket. You can see here there's some kind of grease inside of here to help it stop squeaking, and it's got this arrow on it which I'm not sure what it means because this bracket looks symmetrical. The bushing itself here you can see is a bit worn, the rubber is a bit dry. You can see it's made of natural rubber, and according to the date code on here it looks like it was made in 02 or 03, which is probably the original bushing on this vehicle. So the new part that I'm using is from Mevotech. You can see here that the new part is exactly the same as the OEM part. It's got the split on the end here so that you can put it over the sway bar and then install the bracket over top of it and then bolt that down into the subframe. So I'm just going to use a little bit of synthetic lube here to grease the part. Just going to use my brother's toothbrush here and put a nice light coating of grease on the inside as well as on the outside here. And that's just to prevent it from squeaking. So we want to make sure that the mating surfaces are clean, so I'm just going to use my brother's old sock here and wipe down the mating surface where the bushing will be installed, as well as I'm going to wipe down the entire bar because I will be sliding the bushing around this bar to get it down inside of there. Next up, I'm going to take the bushing itself and install it onto the arm using that split, and then I can run it all the way down the curvature of the arm, push it down to the back, just like that. Next up, I'm going to make sure that the arrow is pointing the front of the vehicle, and I'm going to install the sway bar bushing bracket over top of that bushing and press it down. I'm just going to run a little bit of anti-seize on these mounting bolts because they were pretty difficult to get off. And probably the most difficult part of the job is trying to catch this bolt back into the sway bar bracket and then into the subframe. Can't feel anything in there. I don't know what's going on. So I was able to catch the forward bolt on the sway bar bushing. I'm just going to use my 12mm ratchet here and tighten that up pretty much one click at a time. So I was able to catch the bolt at the back here. I'm just going to use my ratcheting wrench here and tighten this up on the rear sway bar bushing bracket bolt. Alright, so now that the sway bar bushing brackets are nice and tight, I'm just going to come in with my 19mm socket here and tighten up the subframe. Nice and tight. So now that the sway bar bracket bushings are nice and tight, I'm just going to catch this 14mm bolt for this bracket under the subframe here, and then I'm just going to catch this other 14mm nut at the top corner here, and I'll just tighten up these 14mm bolts. These new sway bar bushings, you can see just how much tighter the sway bar is. It's much stiffer to move up and down. Now the replacement part I'm using is a original grade part from Mevotech, and you can see it's very equivalent to the OE style design. It's got a nye-locking nut here, which is better than the crimp locking nut that tends to rust up against the ball pin that I had before. And it's also got this ring that goes around the boot here, compared to no ring on this design here, which could allow contaminants to easily go inside of there and affect the ball pin. Now this worn out ball pin is really loose and floppy, whereas the brand new one is nice and tight. Finally, the other thing you'll notice is it uses an internal hex instead of wrench flats on the outside here. That's to hold the ball pin while you're tightening up the nut. Now I don't care what they say, I'm going to put a lot of anti-seize on these ball pins because I don't want to have any rusting issues like I had before. So now we're going to install the stabilizer link, first at the bottom. Then we're going to insert it at the top. Now we're going to bolt on the nut onto the sway bar. And now we're installing the nut on the top part of the stab link on the strut. And we're just going to tighten up that 18mm nut. Alright, now we're just going to tighten up the top nut. Finally, we're going to torque these nuts down to 55 foot-pounds. Alright, so the new stab link is on there and everything is nice and tight, no more clunks. It's time to put this thing back together. Alright, and now we're going to install the wheel. Finally, we're going to take the vehicle for a test drive to make sure there's no more clunks over bumps.